Testing, iota 3, testing. There we go. All right, we're there. I wrote a message to the archivist at IBM in Armonk, New York, asking if there were any videotapes or still pictures of Kenneth Iverson, who had just recently died. And this is the only thing they had in their archives. And you can see that Ken is at a chalkboard, which was a frequent stance. But what's wrong with this picture? He's writing with his right hand. He could write equally well with his left, equally badly, I guess I should say, with his left hand. And he told me once that the reason why he had that skill is that when he was young and went to grade school, he would normally have done his writing left-handed. He was a lefty. But the school that he went to made no provision for left-handed students, so naturally they tied his left arm behind him and put a pencil in his right arm, so he had to learn how to write with his right hand, and he did.
Eugene mentioned the chalkboards. That was always a very big point. That was actually something I had made a note of before I came here. I know he loved using a big chalkboard. I had a meeting that I was hosting at Yorktown Research one time, and I wanted to get him to come down and present. And it was a long trip, and he didn't know if it was worthwhile for him to do that. But then finally he said, "Do they still have that big chalkboard all the way across the front of the main auditorium?" I told him, yes, they do. He said, I should come down. That's wonderful. I'd enjoy using that again. So, I mean, the fact that he came down to use the chalkboard instead of to see me was fine. I mean, whatever gets him there.
There was at the Yorktown Heights Research Center, they had an evening class in different topics. And the one I signed up for was called A Programming Language, and the teacher was Kenneth Iverson. So I had prior dealings already with him to a little extent, but this was to be my first real inundation under his typhoon of ideas. He came in and saw us. It was a small room, and it was crowded. So he looked at us and said, "Have to get a bigger classroom," and then went up to the chalkboard. And he was wearing a black, dark sweater, and began writing in a hurry on the chalkboard. And when our back was turned, he'd write again on the chalkboard with the other hand. If you were paying attention, you'd notice that most people didn't, and just assumed that all that funny writing was written by the same hand, but it wasn't. He'd switched hands as necessary.
When the sad news of Ken's passing reached us, a few of the APLers in Denmark started to collect material for an obituary. And fortunately, some of the APLers who were around in the very early days are still around and were able to share their memories. Per Gjerlo, who's a lifetime APLer and who many of you may still know, had a lot to contribute. In July of 1967, Hans Helms arranged a summer school with the title of Programming Languages. IBM sent a young man called Kenneth Iverson from the research labs in Yorktown Heights. This Mr. Iverson had developed a mathematical notation which was now executable on the System 360. Along with Ken came Dick Lathwell with a magnetic tape on his arm containing the system. The intention was to do a live demonstration on a typewriter terminal 2741. The session was to be shown on TV screens to the audience. Now, that was a tall order. Typewriter terminal sessions were not very common then, but Dick Lathwell and a young engineer called Henrik Nygaard, went up all the way to the University of Bergen, some 800 miles away up in Norway, where there was a computer where computer time could be rented and would we be able to run the system. Now, during the conference, and after a while, the audience had sort of started to suffer from fatigue. Many interesting but very complicated programming languages had been presented before Mr. Iverson appeared. Though a short way into Mr. Iverson's presentation, he performed a number of keystrokes involving the number 2 a couple of times and a plus sign, declaring that he was now going to develop the expression 2 plus 2. And he hit the enter key, and magically, the number 4 was returned by the machine. Asked about declarations, Iverson pointed out to the audience that the computer was, though stupid, smart enough to figure out that 2 was an integer all by itself. The audience were by now widely awake.
This is the last picture taken of Ken. It was taken by Stella Huey, Roger Huey's wife, and that's Rachel Huey in his hand, and the head getting into the picture on the lower right is Roger's son, Nicholas, and in the background is Jean Iverson, his wife. This is on the roof of the Manulife Center. But this is a very touching picture for me. The picture of Ken reaching a hand out to a very young person is something that he did all his life.
I first met Ken in 1973 when I was 16 years old. And my father had insisted that I write to all the major computer corporations in the Philadelphia area and say that I would be willing to do anything if only they would give me a summer job. So I was a little hesitant to do this, but I did it. And one of the places I wrote to was the IBM Philadelphia Scientific Center, which was at 3401 North Market Street, a place that we passed very frequently in the car on our way to downtown Philadelphia. And it was called the University City Science Center. And when I passed it, I had the dream of becoming a scientist, and I thought, oh, maybe someday I'll work there. And so I wrote them, and I said, I wrote to IBM, and I said, maybe you need a summer student to help. I'll do anything. I'll even empty the trash cans. Just give me a job. So somehow the letter made its way to Ken. I didn't address it to him. And I got a call, and they wanted to interview me. So I went there, and I met Ken and Aiden together in an office, and they proceeded to quiz me about what I knew of mathematics and programming to see whether I was somebody they would want to hire. And they said, have you ever heard of APL? And in my 16-year-old desire to show that I knew everything in the world, I said, oh yes, that's the language where everything is done backwards, isn't it? At that point, Ken rolled his eyes to the ceiling, and I knew that I had made a terrible mistake.
I'm Rohan Jayasekara, and I am one of Ken Iverson's experiments. As most of you know, he had a long abiding interest in the use of his notation in the teaching of mathematics. When I entered high school, I also began to learn APL. And when I was in first year university, I had an algebra class. The professor was talking about number systems. And at one point he said, and of course you can't have a fractional base. Well, a number of us jumped up and said, oh, yes, you can. And as it turned out, we happened to be the students in the class who happened to know APL. And as it turned out, this was all perfectly natural to us to have a fractional base or a negative base, because the way we had been taught about number systems through APL, or the way we had learned about it, it was just perfectly natural to us.
When I met Ken, he was kind of almost everything that I wanted to be. He was a research scientist, and that's what I wanted to be. He was a mathematician, and I wanted to be a mathematician. He was tall, and I wanted to be tall. He had blue eyes, and I wanted to have blue eyes. He spoke French fluently, and I was a real Francophile at the time. And he was also always saying witty French witticisms like, "La vie est comme un bol de merde." Life is like a bowl of crap. And I thought, gee, I wanted to be able to say things like that. And, he had a sardonic sense of humor, and I wanted to do that. He was Canadian. Well, I wanted to be tall. And so it was really a terrific summer there working, and I continued my association with him for a while.
All of my children, one way or another, it seemed to me, were connected with Ken or Ken and Jean in one way or another. There was a time when they were visiting in our house in Palo Alto, and the idea was that evening we were going to go to a funky little theater in Palo Alto, no longer there, where the first 4 or 5 rows of seats were simply pillows and cushions. And there weren't many other, not real seats like people could, like the ones you're sitting in. And it was a Japanese movie being played. I think this was a revival at the time, so Toshiro Mifune, the great Japanese actor, was the hero of it, doing one of his samurai parts. So we said, let's all go, the whole family. And everyone went except Al, who's now a fisherman in Alaska, said he didn't want to go. And he was lying down on the couch. And we said, oh, come on, Al, everyone's going. I'm not going. Come on, we have to take you. You'll enjoy this. It's a real wonderful movie. I don't like it. Anyway, so we got ready to go. And as we were getting all my family into the car, Ken and Jean ran back into the living room where Al was laying on the couch, grabbed him, picked him up, and carried him bodily out to the car to get him in the car. He was going to see that movie if they had anything to do with it.
When I went on to university, I needed some money, and I had written some APL software that would do extended precision arithmetic. It would let you type in 2 arbitrarily large integers and multiply and divide them and raise them to powers, and also a similar thing for floating point. At that point, APL didn't have that capability, so he arranged to buy this, which I think was not so much a vote of confidence in my programming ability as doing a nice turn for somebody who needed some money. But that just shows you what a kind person he was. Later, when I was again in university, he said, "Would you like to be the registered agent for APL Press at your university?" And you could sell APL Press books and T-shirts and buttons. And I thought, wow, this will be a great opportunity to make some money. And I'm pleased to tell you that I may have been the only representative of APL Press ever to turn a huge profit. And if any of you would like the APL buttons, the APL Press buttons that I still have, just send me some email. It's shallot@uwaterloo.ca, and I'll put one in the mail to you. I probably have the largest collection of APL Press buttons in existence.
Terminology was a fundamental focus in this work for didactic reasons as well as for the great power that we, like the ancient sorcerers and sorceresses of yore, knew arises from knowing a thing's true name. Often merely changing the name of a verb, adverb, or conjunction, as when reduce became insert, would give us insight into simpler and more powerful concepts. Our quest for and our delight in finding the right word for something required that we always had dictionaries, a thesaurus, and other materials at hand, and these we would stomp off to these on the instant of any questions about terminology. We shared this delight with many others in the community, including Larry Breed, Eugene McDonald, Bob Smith, and Donald McIntyre. And yet, Ken was adamant in the sense that the geologist McIntyre would approve of about more than terminology and vocabulary. He viewed mathematical rigor as a vital force in programming language design. However, that view was always tacit. I don't recall him ever saying to me, that mathematical rigor is a vital force, right?
Alex Morrow, a longtime friend of Ken's, attended that meeting, and I remember he brought a gift to Ken which was unmatchable. You have to realize that Ken was very interested in spoken language, in natural language, as well as in programming, and always wanted to
make sure that things were stated properly and very clearly and concisely. So, of course, he was very much a follower of dictionaries. Alex Morrow brought him the new printing, the new release of the American Heritage Dictionary, which for the first time had not only APL in the dictionary, but attributed it to Ken Iverson. So making the dictionary is quite a milestone.
Now, Ken visited us time to time, and once I was struggling because I had to translate an introduction to APL, Ken's genius course, into Danish. And I said to Ken, I can't come up with a term for ravel. I mean, these guys call it make list of in Danish, and that's just ridiculous. What should I do? And he said to me, well, you should use the same word as when you have knitted something and you discover you made a mistake and you then undo it. Remove the structure from it. That word is the right word for ravel. And suddenly, not only did I have the word, but ravel made a lot more sense to me than it had previously done before.
Donald also told the story about the history of notation over the years. He had a paper he gave years ago called Hieroglyphics to APL, and spoke of how we have arrived at the point where we not only handle arrays, but we handle empty arrays now, a concept that's completely lost on not only a lot of users of other languages, but even developers of other languages. Donald pointed out this is a big step where we have arrays which have data type, they have a lot of properties to them, but they contain nothing. So the idea of representing nothing in the language is an important concept. And his comment was that we have the Arabs to thank for zero, but we have Ken Iverson to thank for nothing.
We had daily Blackboard discussions. Now, I know some other people here are calling them chalkboard discussions, but they're not made out of chalk, but they are black, so I think they're blackboards.
One of them made a point, and the other fellow said to him, okay, well, that's pretty much what I was saying. That's the same difference. And I thought, oh, here comes an argument. So the other fellow said, wait a minute, same difference. Now you mean it's the same thing, not same difference. That's never grammatically correct to say same difference. Ken immediately said, sure it is. I thought, what? Here's Ken Iverson, Mr. Precision, Mr. Clarity in language, saying that's correct. In what circumstances is that correct? He said, 5 minus 3, 4 minus 2. Same difference.
Had a passion for a cartoon which is no longer in the newspaper because Walt Kelly, its creator, is no longer with us. In fact, the day that the newspapers brought the report of Walt Kelly's untimely death, he and I happened to be on the same train going from Media, Pennsylvania, at the area where we lived, toward the Philadelphia Science Center, where we worked. And Ken saw the notice and said, oh, I wanted to meet him. He was offended that the fellow had died before he had offered himself to Ken to meet.
I remember a conference in New York. I had the pleasure of riding back to Toronto with Ken. As we were driving north along the Hudson River near Mount Pleasant, he said, I have a relative near here. I wonder if you would mind if we stopped for a while. No, I don't mind at all, I said. I thought this will be interesting to meet a relative. It was one of his adopted daughters. As we were getting out of the car, he said, oh, by the way, you might want to put the bottoms of your trousers inside your socks. They have a pet weasel. I think that it was at that same meeting that Arthur Whitney showed Ken a one-page bit of C code that was an APL interpreter. And I think that it was very soon after that that Roger Huey saw the same page and began the project of J. It was written in C, but those of us who know APL could read it because the style was the style of APL. I had many happy visits with Ken at Kiln Farm. talking about J and words and dictionaries. And I realized that Ken was doing more in his retirement than many people do in a lifetime. He was somebody that I admired because of his continued academic activity, doing it for the pleasure, as one was just mentioning. He enjoyed what he was doing, and I think that the people who were around him were also enjoying what they were doing. Thank you.
And that's the one he drew of Ken. And when I saw that, I said, Pete, you made him look so sour. And what's the idea? He's not that kind of person at all. He's all good-humored and always smiling. And he said, well, I didn't want to show any lack of respect because I know he's a very important guy in your area. But he's standing there at a blackboard, as you see, in a teaching stance.
So after we discussed it a bit, we said, well, why don't we call Ken Iverson? Well, he was pictured as being sort of this leader of industry, you know, in a research role in Yorktown, and the idea of calling him seemed a bit extreme. I didn't know if I could even get through to him or if I'd have a secretary that says, what's this about? But eventually we decided, yeah, let's try it. So I called him. He answered his own phone. He was very happy to talk with this junior programmer that was calling him with this question, and he got it resolved immediately. I was very pleased with how approachable he was, how friendly he was, and the fact that he got everything resolved quickly.
So this is Ken in a suit. This is the more usual aspect of Ken. He's got a big smile on his face, and he's wearing the sweater. And he's entertained by something that amused him.
For my own story, it was about 23 years ago that I was a junior APL programmer, and I just wasn't getting enough information about APL, and I wanted to reach out to other people. So I picked up the phone and gave Ken Iverson a cold call. How would you like to be our guest speaker at the first meeting of our Toronto APL SIG? And he gave me a rough time. He asked me, who are you to form a Toronto APL SIG anyway? But in the end, he said yes. And so we organized our event. It was just about 23 years ago in September.
Yes, my sincere condolences to the Iverson family. And I think we're all part of a larger family, as we've learned tonight, that is encompassed by Ken and his work and his intellect and his guidance. So keep that in mind. Both of those families have experienced a great loss. And the legacy, I think, about in terms of what we talked about tonight and so on, is in both academic and commercial ways. Many people have mentioned their careers.
I wanted to point out at the beginning, by the way, that Dan had asked where people came in from for this evening, and asked about various provinces and various states, and pointed out someone that Eugene came in from California, but sort of stopped at that point. And Mr. Kayasuke Saigusa and family members, who Eugene mentioned a little while ago, came in from Japan for this event this evening. So I want to recognize that it's an important event. It means a lot to a lot of people.
I've come from Japan with the messages from some 20 people who were involved in APL.
Yeah, we are here today on behalf of the Danish APL community, and we are happy to be able to contribute to the memorial for Ken.
So, you know, Woody Allen said, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality through not dying. Well, even Ken couldn't do it that way, but he did achieve immortality through his work, and you know, he was my friend and had incomparable influence on my life, and I wish he were here in person that I could thank him.
Donald was also the one who pointed out that Ken, the meaning of Ken, is knowledge, which seems very fitting. I guess in Gaelic it means handsome, but in Old English the root of the word is knowledge. And to know Ken is to know Ken.
Back in the old days in 1962, a fella named Ken Iverson decided what to do. He gathered all the papers he'd been writing for a spell, and he put them in a little book and called it APL. Well, he got him a jot and he got him a ravel, and he revved his compression up as high as she could go. He did some reduction and he did some expansion, and he sheltered all his numbers with the ceiling and the floor. Now Sussenguth and Falcoff, they thought it would be fine to use the new notation to describe the product line. They got with Dr. Iverson and went behind the scenes and wrote a clear description of a batch of new machines. Well, they wrote down dots and they wrote down squiggles and they wrote down symbols that they didn't even know. They wrote down questions when they didn't know the answers, and they made the systems journal in 1964. Now, writing dots and squiggles is a mighty pleasant task, but it doesn't answer questions that a lot of people ask. Ken needed an interpreter for folks who couldn't read, so we hiked to California to talk to Larry Breed. Oh, we got Larry Breed and he got Phil Abrams, and they started coding Fortran just as fast as they could go. They punched up cards and ran them through the reader in Stanford Palo Alto on the 7090. Well, a Fortran batch interpreter's a mighty awesome thing, but while it hums a pretty tune, it doesn't really sing. The thing that we all had to have to make our lives sublime was an interactive program that could let us share the time. Oh, they got Roger Moore, and they got Dick Lathwell, and they got Gene McDonald with his carrots and his sticks. You should have heard the uproar in the Hudson River Valley when they saved the first clean space in 1966. Well, when Al Rose saw this, he took a little ride in a big station wagon with a typo by his side. He did a lot of teaching and he had a lot of fun with an old bent Vita 2741. Oh, it typed out stars and it typed out circles, and it twisted and it wiggled just like a living thing. Al fed it a tape when he couldn't get a phone line, and it purred like a tiger with its trainer in the ring. Now there's much more to the story, but I just don't have the time, and I doubt you have the patience for an even longer ride. So I'm ending this first chapter of the tale I hope to tell of how Iverson's notation blossomed into APL. So keep writing ands when you're not writing neithers, and point with an arrow to the place you want to be. But don't forget to bless those early apple sources who preserved the little seedling that became an apple tree.